My sister asked me to pretend I was the bartender at her fancy wedding. When she lost everything in the divorce, I hired her to clean glasses at her ex-husband's reception. I still remember the exact moment I realized my sister didn't see me as family, at least not in the way you'd hope. We were sitting at a long, oak dining table in our parents' house, surrounded by color swatches, wedding catalogs, and an ever-growing pile of unpaid bills. She was glowing, engaged to a successful real estate developer who wore designer suits and called me champ in a voice that barely disguised the condescension. I'd just gotten off a double shift at the bar where I worked evenings, still wearing the same black button-down and stained apron, when she turned to me with a look I'll never forget. "Actually," she said, delicately sipping a glass of imported white wine, "you'd be perfect for the bar." "I mean at the wedding." "Behind the bar." I blinked. "What?" "At the reception. Instead of spending money on strangers," she said, as if it were obvious, "you could serve the drinks." For a moment, I thought she was joking. I laughed. She didn't. Instead, she flipped a page in the wedding planner binder and said, "You already have experience and it would really help us cut costs. Plus, you're great at this stuff." "But I'm your brother. I'm not a staff member." She looked up then, tilting her head. "Oh, come on, don't be so dramatic. You'd still be there. You'd be part of it. Just not, seated." She said it like she was offering me a seat at the royal court on the floor. That moment should have told me everything I needed to know about how she viewed me. Useful, disposable, and most importantly, not an equal. But I didn't walk away. Not then. I'd spent my entire life chasing her approval ever since we were kids, and she got gold stars for ballet while I was told to stop roughhousing or embarrassing the family. So instead of standing up for myself, I said nothing. Later that night, I overheard her talking to her fiancé on the phone. "No, it's fine. He's used to it. He already works those kind of jobs." That kind of job. That kind of life. Like I was a category, not a person. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a blur of errands, expectations, and humiliation. Every time I offered to help with something else, setting up chairs, arranging music, even just attending, my sister would smile that sugar-slick smile and remind me, "Your station will be the bar." I still remember the list she handed me. It was typed, laminated, and color-coded. Bar expectations. Arrive 2 hours before ceremony. Wear black button-down, no logos. No personal conversations with guests. Smile, you're representing our family. Representing our family. That was rich? On the day of the wedding, I showed up as instructed. I wore my cleanest shirt. I shaved. I stood behind a bar that was draped in lace and gold trim, like dressing up a cage. As guests arrived, I watched them take their seats, sipping the drinks I poured. I saw people I hadn't seen in years, uncles, aunts, old family friends, and not one of them recognized me as part of the celebration. A few nodded politely. One asked me to fetch more napkins. And my sister? She didn't even look in my direction. Not once. Not during the speeches, not during the first dance, not even when I stayed late to pack up the empty bottles. At one point, her new husband leaned over the bar, smirking. "Good job tonight, champ. Maybe we'll call you for the next one." He laughed. I didn't. After the wedding, I went home to my tiny apartment above the garage of the bar I worked at and sat on the edge of my bed for a long time. Something cracked open in me that night. A wound I'd been pretending didn't exist. I realized I wasn't just humiliated, I was invisible. And worse, I had allowed it. But something else happened that night, too. I made a decision. I wouldn't let that be the story's ending. If I was going to be invisible to them, I'd make sure that one day they'd have no choice but to look right at me. Not out of pity. Not out of guilt. Out of necessity. And when that day came, I'd be ready. I spent the next few years working harder than I ever thought possible. I picked up extra shifts. I took business classes online. I studied everything I could about hospitality, management, real estate. I lived frugally, saved every cent, and turned my side gigs into stable investments. The world they had mocked me for being part of? I mastered it. I started managing a new bar downtown, then bought into it. A year later, I owned it outright. By the third year, I had 2 more properties under my name. I wasn't flashy. I didn't post about it online. I didn't tell a soul in my family. They never asked anyway. From time to time, I'd hear updates through mutual contacts. My sister and her perfect husband had moved into a mansion in the suburbs. She posted daily pictures of brunches, boat rides, and diamond-studded anniversaries. They were the golden couple. Untouchable. Until they weren't. But that part of the story comes later. This part is about me. About how I spent years building a version of myself they didn't even know existed. About how I turned every insult, every snub, every demeaning comment into fuel. Because revenge isn't just about proving someone wrong. Sometimes it's about proving yourself right. And the best part? It was all just beginning. After that phone call, I told myself I wouldn't let it get to me. That I was being too sensitive. That she was just overwhelmed and the wedding had taken a toll on her. I convinced myself, stupidly, that maybe I had misunderstood. But deep down I knew. I wasn't helping her. I was working at her wedding. The bartender outfit she picked out? The black button-up shirt, the bow tie, the slacks? Not a coincidence. She made sure I looked like I didn't belong. She made sure I was never in a single family photo. When people asked who I was, she made me answer, just staff. At one point during the night, one of her bridesmaids, some loud, giggly girl with too much champagne in her system, leaned across the bar and said, "You're way too good-looking to be stuck behind a counter." What did you do to her? I froze. She grinned, swaying slightly in her heels. Nora said you used to steal from her. That's why she didn't want you up with the rest of the family. Steal? I stared at her, blinking slowly as if her words hadn't quite landed. But they had. They landed like bricks. I turned toward the back, pretending to look for a bottle. My hands shook. My throat burned. She'd lied to everyone. Made herself the victim. And I was the poor, struggling sister with issues better tucked behind a bar than anywhere near her husband's powerful, wealthy family. And the worst part? I stayed. I poured drinks. I wiped down the counter. I smiled through clenched teeth and played along because at that point I had no other choice. That night, I went back to the hotel room I'd paid for myself and stared at the ceiling for hours. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just disconnected. It was like something inside me had cracked clean in half. After the wedding, Nora didn't call. Not to thank me. Not to check in. Not to apologize. She posted a carousel of perfect, glowing photos on social media. Herself in a designer gown. Her husband beaming. Their hands intertwined as they cut into a 5-tier cake. There was no sign I'd ever been there. I wasn't tagged. I wasn't mentioned. I was invisible. She and her husband moved into a lavish home on the edge of a lake, bought, of course, with his money. She quit her job. She posted daily videos about her skincare routine, her curated kitchen, her soft life. And I worked 2 jobs. I paid off student loans. I shared a small apartment with 2 roommates and split groceries 3 ways. I walked to work most days to save on gas. But I had something she didn't, purpose. She had comfort. I had drive. Over the next few years, I built myself up brick by brick. I enrolled in a business course at night. I freelanced on the weekends. I learned, saved, invested every cent, every lesson, every small win I stored like gold. I watched her marriage unravel from a distance. She stopped posting about him. Her smiles and photos grew thinner. One day, I noticed she had quietly removed wife from her bio. No announcement. No drama. Just gone. A few months later, I got a call from our mother. Nora's moving back into town for a bit, she said casually, as if it were the weather. Oh. Yeah, she's going through something. I won't get into details. But if you two could just be civil for once. I nearly laughed. Be civil? After being paraded around like a shameful secret at her wedding? I bit my tongue and said nothing. But inside I felt something harden. Then came the real twist. I had recently partnered with a friend to open a boutique wedding venue. Nothing fancy, but charming, elegant, affordable. It was my pride and joy, something I poured myself into. That same month, our event manager quit, personal reasons, sudden departure. We scrambled to fill shifts. I posted job openings, sent feelers out to friends. One afternoon, I opened an email from a temp agency we sometimes used. Attached, a candidate profile. No name in the subject line. I clicked. The moment I saw her photo, I dropped my coffee. Nora. Her resume was embarrassing. Fluffed up, over-embellished. A few social media projects, some vague event planning gigs. But the kicker? Her availability. Weekends and evenings preferred. The same nights we hosted weddings. My pulse thundered. She had no idea it was me. No idea who owned the venue. And she was applying, of all things, for a glassware attendant position. Polishing, setting up drink stations, refilling water pitchers. Entry level. Low profile. Humbling. A chill ran down my spine. This was the moment. I called in a favor and had her scheduled for a wedding the following Saturday. She arrived 10 minutes late, flustered, her hair pulled back in a bun. She wore plain black slacks, a white button-up, the uniform we'd listed. When she walked in and saw me standing near the bar, clipboard in hand, she froze. I watched her eyes widen. Nora, I said evenly. She opened her mouth. Closed it. You're the owner? Yes. She blinked. Her face drained of color. I didn't know. You'll be working the backstation tonight. Glass polishing, refill rotation. You'll be supporting the lead bartender. She stared at me. Wait. You're serious? I tilted my head. You asked me to pretend I was staff once, I said calmly. So I figured you'd be comfortable. Her mouth opened again, but I didn't wait for a response. I handed her the checklist and walked away. She worked the entire night. She wiped glasses, sorted bottles, fetched trays. And toward the end of the evening, as if fate had a sense of humor, a couple walked in, arm in arm. The man? Her ex-husband. The woman? His new fiancée. They didn't recognize her right away. Not until she passed by their table and he did a double take. His eyes narrowed. Nora tried to disappear. But I made sure her name tag was visible. I made sure she was seen. Because sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's served chilled in a crystal glass, polished by the very hands that once pushed you aside. The morning after Sophia's wedding felt like a hangover I hadn't earned. I hadn't drunk a drop, but the bitterness of the night before clung to me like smoke. I kept replaying it all in my head, the fake bartender act, the smirk she gave me after I spilled champagne, and worst of all, the way our parents had smiled and nodded as if nothing was wrong. They had known. They had helped her do it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of the borrowed twin bed in the Airbnb my friend had rented for me, staring at the neat stack of tip money in my pocket. $48. That was my reward for being publicly paraded as the help by my own sister. But something happened in that sleepless silence. The hurt hardened. The sting burned into something sharper, something clearer. I made myself a vow that morning, not out loud, not with some big dramatic speech, but a quiet, private decision. This would not be the end of my story. I moved cities within a month, packed everything I owned into 2 suitcases and a cracked duffel bag and caught a train out of that life. Sophia and my parents didn't ask where I'd gone. Didn't check in. It was like they'd all quietly agreed I was the family embarrassment and keeping distance from me was just good etiquette. But that suited me fine. I didn't want them to know where I was. Not yet. I started over. New city. New name on my lease. I got a job washing dishes in a bar downtown, saving every tip the servers handed me when they felt generous. It was humiliating, yes, but not in the way Sophia had meant. This time I was building something. I was nobody's background act anymore. I was learning. Every slow shift was a lesson. Every rude customer was training. I learned how to manage tabs, how to stock liquor, how to prep for wedding receptions. I watched the bartenders closely. The way they mixed a drink wasn't just about alcohol, it was about presence. They controlled the room with a smile and a rhythm of motion. I studied them like they were professors. 3 years passed before I had enough to rent a small space and launch my own mobile bartending service. It wasn't fancy at first. A folding table. A black tablecloth. A collapsible bar. I painted myself in my garage. But it was mine. No one laughed when I served drinks. No one called me a favor. I was the hired professional now. Weddings became my bread and butter. I was good at it. Genuinely good. Word spread. Clients began requesting me by name. I upgraded my equipment. Added staff. What started as a folding table and a dream turned into a fully licensed business with a 5-star rating and a waitlist. It was poetic, really. I'd been forced to play bartender for Sophia. Now I was the bartender and people paid me to show up. But I didn't tell her. Not yet. I watched from afar. Quietly. She had moved cities too after the marriage started falling apart. Her husband, Daniel, Mr. Harvard Law, turned out to be less of a Prince Charming once the cameras were off. Rumor had it he'd started seeing someone else barely a year in. A blonde realtor with veneers and a podcast. By year 2, Sophia was on her second separation. By year 3, she was filing for bankruptcy. Her wedding photos were still on her Instagram, but the comments had been turned off. I never messaged her. Never gloated. Never even liked the posts. I waited. Until the day I got a call from a new client, some big-shot event planner hosting a private wedding at an exclusive vineyard. She said the family wanted something classy but familiar and that she'd heard I was the best. I said yes, of course. Sent over my rates. Booked the date. It wasn't until I saw the final guest list that I realized who the bride was marrying. Daniel. Sophia's ex-husband. The venue? A luxury vineyard Sophia had once bragged about, saying, "One day I'll renew my vows there when I upgrade rings." I stared at the name on the booking confirmation for a full 5 minutes. Daniel H. Groom. Planner, Ivy Events. Vendor request, bartending services, 3 staff minimum. Requested company, tap and twist by my name. The smile that spread across my face wasn't cruel. It was calm. Like the world had finally turned itself upright. I accepted the gig. Sent in the contracts. Confirmed my best staff. But I also made a call of my own. To Sophia. It rang twice before she answered, her voice brittle. Hello? Sophia. It's me. A pause. Wow. Okay. Hi. I heard you're looking for work, I said, voice neutral. She hesitated. I mean, yeah. A bit. Things have been complicated. But why? I'm hiring temporary staff for an event. Just a few hours. Light glassware maintenance. Nothing heavy. You're hiring me? Yes. And you own this company? Yes. Silence again. Then, I guess. Yeah. I could use the cash. I sent her the paperwork that night. She didn't ask what the event was. She didn't recognize the address. She didn't even question the uniform, plain black shirt, pants, and a black apron with staff printed on the chest in bold white font. But she showed up on time. I met her in the staff entrance. She didn't recognize the venue at first. Not until she stepped into the prep room and saw the floral arrangements. Not until she peeked through the back curtain and saw Daniel at the altar. Her face went pale. And then she turned to me. You knew, she said. Not a question. Just realization. I looked at her calmly. I did. You set me up. No, I said. I hired you. You needed work. You accepted. She stared at me for a long time. Like she was trying to figure out what game I was playing. But this wasn't a game. It was reality. The exact kind of reality she'd served me once in front of 200 of her closest friends. You can leave, I said, gesturing to the door. No hard feelings. But the paycheck won't come with it. She didn't move. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was desperation. But she stayed. She polished glasses. She cleared tables. She stood behind the bar where I now commanded the space with a single glance, where guests laughed at my jokes and tipped handsomely. No one recognized her. They thought she was just another staff member. Some even waved their empty flutes at her impatiently. And when Daniel walked in arm with his new wife, Sophia turned to me and whispered, "Does he know I'm here?" I didn't answer. Because that wasn't my business anymore. She stayed for the full 6-hour event. Quiet. Obedient. Efficient even. She didn't complain once. But her eyes never stopped moving, scanning the guests, the bride, the dance floor. And when it was all over, when the last flute had been washed and the champagne spill cleaned, she walked up to me, eyes heavy. Why? She asked. I looked her in the eyes. You once asked me to play a role. A silent one. Just a helper. Someone unimportant. All I did was return the favor. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I handed her the envelope with her payment. Slightly more than minimum wage. No tips. She took it without a word. And I watched her walk out into the night. She didn't say thank you. She didn't say goodbye. But she didn't throw the money back either. I stood in the empty hall, wiping down the bar that bore my company's logo, and let the silence settle. It wasn't revenge. Not really. It was justice. The kind that doesn't need applause. The kind that knows when a story has truly come full circle. A week passed after the reception and I didn't hear from Sophia. No thanks. No text. No call. No attempt to justify what had happened. But then again, that was always her way, make a mess, walk away before anyone could ask her to pick up a broom. But I didn't need her gratitude. I'd gotten exactly what I wanted. Closure. And a front row seat to the unraveling of a woman who once laughed in my face when I asked to be treated like family. Still, I would be lying if I said that night hadn't left a knot in my chest. Watching her wipe lipstick off wine glasses while her ex-husband slow danced with another woman, yeah, it hit harder than I thought it would. Not out of pity, but out of history. We used to share bunk beds. She used to braid my hair and tell me we'd be rich and famous someday, her on TV, me backstage designing the wardrobe. I used to think she was magic. Untouchable. The kind of girl fairy tales were written about. But then she grew up. And somewhere between glittery notebooks and champagne towers, she decided she was the princess and I was the scullery maid. A few weeks after the reception, I got a call from her mother. Did you really make your sister work your event? She snapped, skipping the hello entirely. I didn't flinch. She applied. I hired her. She said you tricked her. I leaned back in my chair, eyes on the golden light spilling across my office. No, Mom. I did exactly what she did to me 5 years ago. I handed her an apron and told her to smile for strangers. That's different, she said quickly. Yeah, it is, I replied. Because I paid her. Silence on the line. You've always been so resentful, she said finally, like it was some deep confession I hadn't heard before. Even when we did everything for you. Everything? I laughed bitterly. You mean letting me live in your house while you funded Sophia's second apartment and told me not to ask questions? Or was it when you told me not to embarrass the family by crying about being cut out of her wedding photos? More silence. I could hear her breathing. Not crying. Just realizing. I needed a favor, not a job, I said quietly. And you all made sure I never forgot the difference. She hung up. No goodbye. No apology. Just static and a deadline. And for the first time in years I didn't feel the need to call her back. The weeks rolled on. I grew my business. Hired new staff. Landed a corporate retreat that paid more than I used to make in 6 months. And then, because karma has impeccable timing, Sophia came knocking again. This time it was literal. I opened the back door of my venue one morning and found her standing there, arms crossed, sunglasses hiding her swollen eyes. I need work, she said flatly. I didn't blink. You still have my email. I thought maybe we could talk, she said, voice cracking. Face to face. I should have said no. Should have shut the door and walked away. But curiosity is a stubborn beast. So I let her in. She sat on one side of my office, legs crossed, sipping water like it was poison. I'm out of money, she said finally. Daniel stopped support. My credit's maxed. I had to move in with a friend, but she's kicking me out next week. I said nothing. I applied to a few places. Nothing yet. I figured. She looked up at me. Maybe you had a cleaning shift. Or something. I stared at her for a long time. And in that silence, I watched every version of our relationship flicker between us, the childhood games, the cruel wedding night, the glass she polished while her ex toasted a new bride. You used to tell people I was a dropout who couldn't be trusted with a wine opener, I said. I know, she whispered. And I'm sorry. The words hung there. Thin. Fragile. Apologies are words, I said. Growth is behavior. She nodded. I didn't smile. Didn't offer reassurance. But I handed her a clipboard. Thursday. 6 p.m. cleaning crew. Black pants, black shirt. You clock in when you arrive, not when you feel like it. I'm not your sister here. I'm your boss. She stared at the paper like it was a mirror. But she took it. She signed. And Thursday she showed up. She worked 3 weddings that month. Quiet. Invisible. Efficient. She never spoke to guests. She kept her head down. She followed instructions like scripture. My staff didn't know who she was. I didn't tell them. But I watched her. Closely. The 2nd month she asked to stay on. The 3rd month she asked to train on drink prep. I didn't say yes. Not at first. I made her earn it. Like I had to. From scratch. No shortcuts. But she did. One night, after a particularly difficult event with a rowdy bridal party and a broken sink, she sat with me in the back room. I was so stupid, she said, wiping her hands. So entitled. Like the world owed me something because I looked good in a dress and could lie with confidence. I didn't answer. You built this, she said. Without anyone. Without me. And her voice cracked. I wish I had seen you sooner. I looked at her. I wish you had too. We're not best friends now. Not close. But she's still on my payroll. Sometimes I catch her glancing at me with this quiet awe like she can't believe the girl she once humiliated now signs her paychecks. I don't gloat. I don't need to. Because the truth is I never wanted revenge. I wanted to matter. To be seen. And the day she stood behind my bar, in my uniform, and asked where the wine key was? That was the day I knew I'd won. Not because she fell. But because I rose. And she saw it. Every single unforgettable second of it.